This is a very special episode of my podcast. Jenny Vyas is easily one of the most inspirational people I've had the chance to meet, and I put meet in quotes because we actually haven't met in person. I got to know her over Instagram, of all things. Her posts, both the art that she presents as well as the words that she shares, are sure to improve your day. In this episode, I dive deep into Jenny's origin story from growing up in India to her journey to the US as a 19-year-old to ultimately finding her purpose as an artist, helping people grow through grief and pain. You're going to really enjoy this one. I am beyond excited to chat with my guest today. On this podcast, I'm on a bit of a journey to meet people who inspire me and who I draw a lot of motivation from. And but in this case, I also get to talk to someone that I'm a huge fan of. And so we'll get into that. But Jenny, tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Hi, thanks for having me. I am a fine artist based out of Chicago. And I started painting about 5 years ago, so kind of fairly new as far as, personally how I feel about it. But I kind of went all in. So it's been kind of a wild journey. And 5 years later, here I am sort of established in Chicago. And I've done some work outside of Chicago as well.
Yeah. Well, and I want to get into the pivot you made in your life.
Yeah.
Because my understanding is you were doing similar things to what I do. I'm in the e-commerce and digital marketing world. That's what you were doing before you became an artist, right?
Yeah. So my background, my educational background is in graphic design. I did that at UIC here in Chicago. And I knew right out of the gate that I didn't want to just do graphic design because one, there's not enough money in it. And two, the idea of strictly doing something that the client wanted within guidelines wasn't very attractive to me. So I dove right into e-commerce right out of college. My first job was in e-commerce. And coincidentally, my boss was looking for a graphic designer because he didn't have the creative skills to kind of run the website end of things from a creative standpoint. So that was my first job. And then I stayed in that space for about 15 years. My last job was heading e-commerce at Oprah. There was an e-commerce, we had a brick and mortar store across from the studio. So they brought me on board to head that. And I stayed there for about 4 years until we shut shop because they all of the operations moved to LA. And they didn't want to take the retail end of things down there. So we shut shop here, got a really nice sabbatical from Oprah as a gift. And that was the first time I took some time off in life because I just wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I didn't know I could paint yet. So this is all like before pre-painting. And that's really, I think, my pivot happened because I started turning down jobs in corporate world because I was in high demand, right, coming out of Oprah. And after I had wasted a few people's times, after I had gotten a couple offers and not taking them, it was very evident that I wasn't interested in the corporate world anymore. So I went into the startup space, but then the same thing, building somebody else's dream kind of didn't work for me. So after 2 years in that space, I had started consulting for digital marketing with clients in Chicago. And that really kind of opened up the mental capacity for me to kind of start taking risks because I just went all in the digital marketing space and I wasn't struggling for money. So that was kind of nice. I will say one thing, networking is like the key in everything. And I have always networked. I'm that person who goes to a nightclub and comes home with business cards. So for me, like all of those, came to fruition and I went into that digital marketing space. But even then, something inside of me kept saying, you need to paint. It was really bizarre. And then like all great stories mine started from a breakup, went through a breakup. My ex-fiance and I split. And during those 6 months of healing, when I really wanted to dive into understanding the patterns that had kind of governed my decisions in, being in the relationships I had been in until then, when I started unpacking that, I just needed an outlet and painting became my medium for that, which I'm so thankful for because I didn't even know I could paint.
Yeah, right. Like when I read your backstory, It said that you had only painted once or something before you started this.
Yeah. Yeah. So in graphic design, you're supposed to take all the basic classes, right? Like, so I took color theory, my one class of like understanding painting, hated it. And then I took, I think in color theory itself, I had to paint something. So I had to choose like a postcard. I think she had like 100 postcards on the table. And I was notorious for showing up late in classes. So I showed up and all the good, easier stuff was all gone. So I had like these miniature landscape paintings from this artist who literally creates like 8x8 miniature landscape. And they're so detailed. And I like, that was my pick. So I chose one of those, and then I had to paint the same thing. I had to basically recreate that and then paint the same thing in complementary colors. It was fascinating to see that transformation. But that was it. That's the only thing I had ever painted.
And you never thought about painting again? You just sort of did that
No,
assignment and moved
I
on?
did not enjoy the process, mainly because it was so, again, like it was like graphic design. It was so restricted, right? Because I had to paint something that was already painted. And so the process was enjoyable for me. But it did teach me how to understand colors and painting, like mixing techniques and stuff. So I think everything that I've learned over the years has really unpacked in painting now.
Gotcha. Well, I want to dive way back, but let me ask you one question, because you talked about networking. Has networking helped you in the art industry?
100%. I don't think I would have made it this far in 5 years, this quickly, had I not networked my whole life, because relationships really, really go a long way. I've been able to do solo shows because of my relationships. I've been able to get placed in galleries. I just got placed in a gallery because of my networking. So I don't think it's like, that's massive. I say, take names, take business cards.
Yeah. That's one thing that when I get a chance to speak to, say, college students or something, I always tell them, like, network. Like, it took me years to learn that, but once I did, everything in life can.
Oh, it is everything. I mean, I fortunately have never had to look for a job because of networking after my first one.
Yeah.
The very first one, you have to look for it.
All right, let's go way back.
Yes.
Where are you from? Where were you born?
I was born in India, from a small city named Baroda. It's a metropolitan city in Gujarat. It's the state. And it's about, from a vicinity standpoint, from a geographical standpoint, it's about 12 hours away from Mumbai.
Okay. And grew up there? Did you?
I grew up there. I grew up there. I was 19 when I moved here. So right out of high school.
And straight to college?
Straight to college here.
Okay.
Fortunately, I had already decided that I was going to study graphic design because I had gotten accepted in India in a fine art college. Never knew I could paint, but graphic design program here at the UIC college, I think it was just like, it was too restricted to graphic design. I wish they had like let me dive into the first year into painting and everything. So I would have probably made a different decision. But again, dots connect backwards. You know, everything lands you where you're supposed to land.
Yeah, I know that's a big part of your belief system.
It is huge.
When you came here, was it just you, or did your family come? Did anyone else come with you?
It was my immediate family, my parents, my brother, and I.
Gotcha. And everybody to Chicago?
Everybody came here. We had an uncle who was living alone at the time. His wife was still in India. So he had a house and we just were able to stay with him. So it just made sense to come here.
Right. Okay. And over time, have you been back?
I've been back about 3 times, and the last one was over 11 years ago. And so I'm really, really, I'm ready. I miss it.
You do. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm overdue. Yeah.
As you talk about sort of your path, you know, there's obviously a creative bent to what you do, and who you are, but this, I'll call it a free spirit. This sort of entrepreneurial bent. Did that come from one of your parents?
As a culture, we're not we're not taught, we're not risk averse. We are very careful, you know, like the chosen careers are usually medicine or engineering. So art, I literally am the only artist in my generations of our families. Like, I feel like I don't think there's ever been an artist in my family.
Right.
Even if people had skills, my grandpa could always draw. My mom was very creative, but even she studied chemistry. So we, as a culture, we don't dive into this space. So it just wasn't a natural avenue that I would have chosen growing up, but I was very creative. I could always draw. I never thought about painting, but I could, like, you could give me a cartoon character, and I always tell people, like, if you want to know if you can draw, if you can recreate, like even Batman, for example, I think you have the basic, perspective skills, then I think you can draw. And I could always do that. So the progression was fine with me, but no, it was entrepreneurial. I think my brother and I, for some reason, thank God we have it in us. And my brother is a software developer. He's a consultant. And so we went independent and we haven't looked back. My brother's always been independent. So I think that's another reason probably I was able to take that risk as well, because he does really well for himself. And I can always go to him for any professional advice that I need.
Gotcha. Is he the older brother?
He's a younger, just a year.
Younger.
We're literally a year apart. We're almost like Irish twins.
Gotcha. Okay. So, all right. So you get to Chicago, you go to school, you end up in the field of marketing, digital marketing, and then you go through the breakup, and then you're sort of sussing things out. Tell me about your art from the perspective of the things I've read. I sort of want you to tell. Because it sounds like the idea of the Phoenix and the rising and talk about that for a second, because then I want to come out of 2013, I think is when you had this happen.
Right. So I've always been fascinated by human condition and fragility, like how fragile we are. And for me, not being able to, as a culture, we are not taught how to manage emotional risk. We're a very stoic community of people. And it sounds crazy because we're a very loving community. But we don't talk about pain openly. We are, the mantra is that you pick yourself up and move on, right? Like that's always the lesson that you're taught, that you fall down, you get back up. And so that moment when you fall is never really conversed about. And for me, I had a very hard time communicating my emotions and my pain, even in my relationships, personal relationships, romantic relationships, especially. And so, when I chose to paint, there's a book which I love. It's called Still Writing by Dani Shapiro. And her writing is just so incredibly beautiful to me. And she unpacks this whole process of painting for an audience of one. And her audience was her husband, because if you paint for the world, you really can never be successful, right? Like, because you're never going to be able to make anyone happy. And so for me, I decided that my audience would be myself. I'm a huge philosophy nerd, I should say. I don't know. I hate saying that word, but like, that's what I am. I love reading philosophies, different philosophies over time. And my father is a philosopher himself, and he's spiritual also. So for me, it was such a beautiful combination of being able to have those conversations with him. But then it was also a very lonely space for me, because I could never have those conversations with my friends, for example, because they don't share the same interests. And they're not supposed to, right? Like, that's a good friendship when they can bring other things to the table. But I needed this like outlet, this space, this platform to share these opinions, these ideas, these readings that I've kind of saved over time. And when I started connecting the two with my art and sharing those like quotes and these pieces of writings that I like, like they get heavy, and people started connecting with it. Like, it was like music was playing in the air, I'm like, oh my God, there's an audience for this. People can connect to this. So for me, it was like huge moment of catharsis. And that's really what my work is about. I unpack a lot of human condition, human frailty is very fascinating to me. And talking about that liminal space where growth happens, because we're not really able to talk about growth while we're going through it, because it's such a transformational phase, and transitions are painful. If the good transitions are painful, and we're able to reflect upon them as a third person when we've been through it, right? Like when we're under the wave, there's no way we can talk about that. So I wanted to document those moments, those changes, those transformational moments, because that turmoil, that chaos is really where that complete shift happens in our human condition. And being able to capture that in my work is really the ultimate goal in every piece that I create.
I have so many questions to ask based on what you just said.
Please.
I'll start with this one. I'm curious, have you gone through something really hard since you started this journey and then really sat in that and the art came from it? Or are you constantly drawing from things that, happened in the past or other people's
reflection of both. I mean, as I go through, I think what this journey has done for me in the last 5 years, it's made me very patient and very capable of reflecting upon every emotion that I go through, because I get very focused, right? Like it's a very singular emotion that I try to capture in each painting, and I get so fixated on it that I have to really truly unpack it for myself. To, like, if I'm talking about jealousy, if I'm talking about transitions between relationships, or even talking about like my relationship with my father, for example. And like, people don't need to know that that's what I'm talking about per se, but like, these are the moments that I'm trying to really translate into my paintings. For me to be able to process that as from an analytical standpoint, because I'm very analytical in general. Like, I'm always in my head. So for me, this like kind of breaking it down has become such a wonderful thing. So I've gone through some tough professional situations where when I did some projects, and this like documenting that and really understanding that some people, like, I actually overstepped my I guess I should say my boundaries in one of the projects that I undertook, and learning to apologize, learning to walk away from that, learning to let the other person know that, hey, this was your project. I apologize for taking the lead on it, because it's not my baby, it's your baby. I basically took somebody else's baby and made my baby, right? Like, so it was hard. And like, those lessons, as simple as they sound, they're really hard, because they can teach you so much in how you can be a leader. And since then, when I lead projects, I'm so much more compassionate with people. So I think these are just like smaller learnings, right? Like the larger learnings. My greatest learning, I should say, is repairing my relationship with my father. Not that was ever bad. I just didn't grow up with my father. I was 19 when I started living with him here. So we had farms in India. My dad had to take care of the farms, and for education, we lived in the city. And so I didn't see him every day. And growing up, not that my parents are very much in love. It was never about their relationship. I just didn't grow up with him. So I had all this resentment that built over time that I had no idea. And my art has really helped me kind of like clear out those muddy waters and like understand why I'm so angry with him, because he hasn't done anything for me to be angry. If anything, he sacrificed his life for like a better life for me. So
that's amazing. So it's super therapeutic for you to go through this process.
For both of us. Yeah. And I'm able to communicate that, because before I couldn't. I would just be angry.
And it's easier for this would be hard for me as well, to sit down and like truly express that to my father or my mother.
Still working. I'm still learning. I think I've gotten better, I should say, in the last 5 years. I think it's always work in progress with, childhood wounds. Your parents are really only trying to teach you how to survive in the real world. They don't know, the wounds and those wounds are necessary, but sometimes they don't know how deep the wounds get. I mean, the reality is that where your parents leave off, your spouse picks up, right? Like, you expect your spouse to heal those wounds. And if you don't know your wounds, I think that's where the failures happen. And that's the pattern that had repeated in my relationships. So my last relationship fell apart. I really just wanted to understand because it didn't make sense to want to be with someone who didn't want to be with me, right? It just like to think that somebody else's will is a direct upshot of your actions is such a narcissistic idea. And I had to really kind of get to the bottom of that it doesn't make sense. Why do I still feel pain for letting him go? And it really boils down to the fact that I was so wounded from my missing relationship with my father, that I was just really trying to fulfill that in my romantic relationships. And that's been, I'd say, a pretty big learning. It's almost like a manuscript.
Yeah, but to get to that learning, have you studied psychology? Have you? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, a lot. I went into a very deep 2-year deep therapy with a therapist. I'm talking almost 2 or 3 sessions a week sometimes. Okay. And he was incredible. He was so patient with me, because I can get very deep in philosophy, and he would listen. And we would and it was wonderful. It just transformed me.
Yeah.
So I would recommend that to people, like, if you're really struggling, because it's not fair to your family, it's not fair to your friends.
Yeah.
To have to listen to you, like, pay someone to listen to you.
Pay someone to do it. Well, it's definitely, a stigma here, to go to a therapist.
It's very much in our family.
Yeah, I think that's tough, but I can imagine it's probably more, I don't know, I'm making a huge general assessment here, but is it more accepted in the US than in India? And so it's
100%,
even, yeah.
100%. It's not even the norm to talk about it, right? Like
Okay.
I think there's a story that's circulating recently. A woman, an Indian woman, young Indian woman, just committed suicide from postpartum depression. And that's not talked about. And that
Mm,
kind of caught a lot of young women's attention because it's such a stigma to talk about therapy. Like,
yeah.
you know, postpartum depression is a real thing. My friends have
Hmm.
gone through it. And so, yeah, no, it's not part of the culture. It's not the norm. My parents would never consider therapy.
Yeah.
They would never consider it. It's funny. And I'm like the only one. I'm like, we should all go to therapy. And they're like,
Yeah.
no.
You're like putting therapy up on walls now.
Literally, I'm like, I'm all about it.
Yeah. So the book you mentioned, Still Writing, what's interesting about that author and what you said she says, you know, you write for one person. Um Stephen King wrote a book on writing, and it's his process for writing, and he says the exact same thing. He says he writes basically for his wife. He pictures her when he's writing,
Yeah.
and that's where he starts, and he says the same thing. So that's interesting. And as you know, paint for yourself, my question is, as you've had success, and as you're being, you know, you're in more demand and you're being asked, has it been harder for you to always go back to, okay, am I doing, is this one for me, or is this one for somebody else? Am I really staying true to painting for myself? Has that been difficult, or no?
So it does get challenging with commissions. With my work, not so much, because that's the goal when I'm in the studio. It's really never about anybody else, because if I don't do that, I don't think I'd paint anymore. Like,
Yeah.
I think I would quit. But commissions, it does get challenging because it's a marriage between my vision and the client's
Mm,
vision.
yeah.
And so my love for commissions is dying a little bit. And I have turned away quite a few commissions this year because of this reason, because at the end of the day, I didn't start painting
Hmm.
and telling stories. And I'm not saying like, oh, I only unpack my stories in my work. I actually unpack learnings from other people's, the conversations that I have with the world. Anything that I feel like needs attention and needs a stage, I will create that stage for that, sentiment. But it's not so much, I don't have that liberty when I'm doing that, when I'm painting commissions. So yes, there's a little bit of joy lost there.
Yeah. I
But I'm
can see
working
that,
through it. Yeah.
especially your story of graphic design and having clients, and look, I understand that world is interesting, because the client wants a designer or somebody who really cares, but
Yeah.
not so much that they're opinionated to the point where
Right.
it's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting world.
I had a teacher in graphic design school, and she said that she had a client who wanted magenta and orange, the combination, right? Like, and ideally, like, those are two very bright colors. You wouldn't want to marry those. And she tried to convince, and she had created all these like color boards, mood boards for the client, and the client just didn't like any of them, even if they were beautiful combinations. And they had set up a meeting on one point in the client's office, and she walked in, and the entire office was orange and pink,
Mm.
like, right, and magenta. And she's like, you and so she realized, she's like, there's no changing this person's mind. So she did give in, and she ended up using that palette. But like, and that story stuck with me. I'm like, oh my God, I never want to go through that. Like if I have an opinion. So I will say this, I will not take commissions where it's strictly the client's visions. I
Mhm.
just won't. And if there is a conflict back and forth too
Yeah.
much, we do end up with a decision that we both are happy with ultimately, because
Sure.
I will say, okay, that's not sitting right with me, or it doesn't translate to what I would do. I would never, like, for example, like be the bridge, right? Like the mural. They
Yeah.
wanted an actual bridge. And I was like, I would never put a bridge. Like, it's just not my work. My work is metaphorical. Like,
Right.
I want the people to be the bridge.
Yeah.
So stuff like that. And I will go back and forth. And we talked about it. I'm not kidding. 3 days straight. And we had like a week to execute this mural. We're still talking about the bridge. I'm like, you guys, I'm not making the bridge. So
So, I am curious, I read that you're a fan of serial killer movies. I won't say of serial killers, but of
I know I'm
serial
obsessed with
killer, like
I'm obsessed with
thrillers.
serial killers. I'm obsessed with anything serial killers. I'm terrible. I'm not
Uh,
one.
Yeah, right. So I've got two questions. One, have you watched Mindhunter?
Of course.
Okay, good. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and are you a Hamilton fan? Like
of
the
course.
rest of the world? Right. And
Yeah,
so you know that the main guy is
yeah,
the king. Yeah. So
yeah,
that blew me away when I first connected those dots. But
yeah.
I just wanted to make sure you were a Mindhunter fan. My real question is, are there things that you don't yet bring out or focus on when you're creating your art, like death, for instance? Are there things that are so deep at this point you haven't quite gone there? Is everything on the table? Like, how do you
Not
think
yet.
about that?
Not yet. So I think the darkest painting I've painted is my, and I'll send you a photo of this if you want to insert it. It's called Duress, and it's from being quarantined. It was a pretty dark piece, and that's the darkest piece I've done. But no, I haven't even gotten anywhere
Okay.
near the darkness that I want to paint. And I actually will, like, that is a show that I want to do hopefully
Mm,
next year. And it's not for, a regular audience. And I'm fascinated by death. I'm fascinated by afterlife. I am, as a culture, we believe in reincarnation. And I just, like, the deeper, darker emotions are so interesting to me.
yeah.
So, like, and I truly think that, because I'm very curious, like, where evil resides. I'm very, very curious about that space. So,
Yeah. Well,
oh my God, I can't
that.
believe we're like totally on a different tangent. Yeah. But yeah, I totally want to paint that.
Yeah. I mean, I can see that, and I can see that it'll be interesting when we talk again when you've been down that path, because I
Yeah.
can see that when you're, it's interesting. So the closest I think I probably ever have come to maybe what you go through when you're really in focused in
Hmm.
on the painting and you're drawing from real emotion is like I've had to give two eulogies for people in my life, and going through thinking about what I was going to say and the words I was going to use, it like the emotions really flooded through of that
Yeah.
person and my connection to them, right? And I'm guessing as you dive deep into some of these topics and going into things like death, that's got to be like draining, right?
Oh, incredibly draining. And every
Yeah.
time I paint a very dark piece that people might not even see it as dark, um, it's so draining. Like, it's just,
Yeah.
sometimes I need like 3 days off,
Yeah.
from everything. And it's a lot of alone time. My therapy is being alone, right? I need a lot of alone time. I talk about it very extensively, and people are like, "What is your fascination with being alone?" But yeah, it is incredibly draining. But I feel like if I don't do that every now and then, I feel like something's hugely missing
Mm,
from my intellectual, I guess, side that needs to be fed every few months.
sure. Yeah, I get that.
But then
Okay.
there are times when I'll watch, like, binge watch Mindhunter, and then I need a break from everything serial killers. So I'll watch Friends.
No, you need a break from the serial killer show?
Well, I mean, like, like, if you
Yeah.
watch Criminal Minds and then I watch
Uh-huh.
Mindhunter, I mean, Criminal Minds is really, really dark, right? So
Yeah.
people don't understand that. Like, yeah, it's a great cast, but the stories that they unfold, those are based on real stories. They're
Yeah,
not,
right.
there's some real evil out there.
I'm really curious when you first like how did you even start to say, okay, I want to paint something? Like how did you even know what to buy? Did you do it on an iPad or something at first? Like how did that even start for you?
So it's so weird because, like, I just wanted to paint, right? Like, I had this calling and I felt it. And I talk about, like, this intense pull, this, like, it's there, it's inside of you, and you just know in your gut. It's not here, it's not here, it's like in your gut. You can just feel it. And it's something that you just feel like you have to do. And I had that during the whole 6 months of the breakup, right before the breakup, actually. And if you look back, when transitions are coming, there are signs. You just know that
Mm,
something's shifting. And I knew something was shifting in our relationship. He had proposed 4 months into that proposal, things had shifted for us. Um, and I just knew a change was coming, like a storm was coming. I just didn't know what kind of a storm. I didn't expect the relationship to fall apart. I thought the storm was going to be me, like, actually quitting the corporate, I was thinking about quitting the startup industry, the space, and start my own, business. And which I did end up doing right before the breakup. But I think I I can't even, like, explain this feeling that I had to paint. the actual like defining moment for me was when the breakup actually happened. And a week before my like realization, oh my God, this is my new life. The not fun moment of being single. And I had seen an article titled The Crossroads of Should versus Must by El Luna, and it's now a book. And she turned it into a manifesto basically in the form of a book. And when I saw the article on Medium, I bookmarked it because I just knew like it was a massive sign that things were going to shift radically for me when I read it. So I bookmarked it for a desperate moment, which I knew was coming. And a week later, I go out to party, my first night out as a single woman with my girlfriend. And the sadness the next day that came in, like it was in my bones, right? Like I'm sleeping in the living room on the floor, made my mom sleep on the couch next to me because I just couldn't be alone in the room. And I woke up at 3 a.m. because I had fallen asleep from exhaustion, crying. And then I woke up at 3 a.m., couldn't sleep, and I read that article on my phone at 3 a.m. And she talks about how she went from the corporate world and started painting out of nowhere. However, I didn't know. The good thing is I didn't know that she had gone to college. She had studied fine arts. And I'm like, had I known that, I probably wouldn't have taken the dive.
Yeah.
And I thought she had my background history, because she had like worked with she had worked with LinkedIn. She had worked with so her background was very similar to mine, designing products. She had worked with Uber, designing the original, like the very second generation of that app. And so I chose to paint. I'm like, all right, I'm going to go paint. And so I went and picked up supplies next day, posted this cool photo with all my supplies, and then started crying because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was going to paint, honestly. For the first 6 months, it was brutal. I hated everything I created. And then I would share it on social media and expect likes. And it became about this like culture. So I decided to take everything off as far as like take a break from that, not share my work until I truly fell in love with it, which I really think that you should be a fan of your own work. If you don't really like your own work, because I truly think the world is a reflection of how you feel. And so if you don't like it, you're going to think people don't like it either.
Yeah.
And so taking that break, and then Elle actually was running a project called the 100-Day Project every year. And so it still happens every year in April. I think it's April 8th, it kicks off every year, or April 3rd. And in 2015, that project was coming back. And so I had attempted it the year before, middle of the year, and it was terrible. That's when I had created a few pieces and I hated all of them.
What is that though, by the way? The 100-day, it's every day you do more.
So you commit to do something creative for 100 days. So you could write poetry, you could, write a book, you could paint, you could stitch, there's so many incredible projects that happen out of it.
Yeah.
And so I chose to do that in 2015. So I should say one more class that really helped me was my drawing class in college. I had to take drawing 101. And in that, one of my teachers had given us an exercise to create work from negative space. So he basically made us color the whole sheet of paper with charcoal and then had us draw with an eraser. So he basically had us create a painting out of an eraser. And I was fascinated what showed up on my paper. I'm like, oh my God, this is really cool. And so that exercise stayed with me. And one day, it was like March 2015. It was raining. It was a Saturday. I still remember. It was like 2 p.m. I saw this woman's portrait with a lot of in dark light. And I was like, oh, how about everything that light hits on her body? What if I created the painting out of negative space? And so I took a piece of charcoal and I sketched it out and I drew 4 of those and I threw them up on social media. And people were just like, oh my God, what? I didn't even know you could draw. I'm like, I didn't know I could draw. And so I still have those 4 original sketches. And that's where everything was born. And I decided a month later, I would join the project. And I chose to unpack vulnerability for myself because, it's a kryptonite for so many people, for me especially. And so I chose to talk about vulnerability from a relationship standpoint. Initially started from a romantic standpoint, but then it unpacked into, it kind of spread across so many different topics. And I talked about vulnerability in spiritual sense and, relationships with your parents, your friendships, everything that, if you were to really understand risk, emotional risk, what would it look like? And I'd say by, they say it takes 21 days or 20 days for a new habit to be formed. And I'd say by day 22, I was comfortable in that space. I was really happy. And I started selling work like day 2. It was crazy. Someone messaged me and I'm like Googling. I'm like, how do you price your art?
Yeah, right.
I didn't, right? Like I had no idea. And as soon as she got it, she's like, double your prices right now. I'm like, okay.
Wow.
Yeah, it was such a fascinating journey and to this date, everything that comes from the studio is never to sell. It's always to just like really create work that people can emotionally connect with. Because I'm a storyteller by heart, and to be able to write stories through my paintings is such a beautiful journey.
Was it right away? Maybe it was in that 100-day period where you felt the therapeutic element of what you were doing? Is that when that started to happen?
Yes. So like the very first day I posted just the painting and the title. And I spent a lot of time on my titles, right? Like people are always like, those titles are really like interesting. Like each word is very like thought out. And so the first day I only posted the title. The second day is when I tied a piece of writing with the title, like a quote. I attached a quote to it, and people were like, it was like instant gravitation towards that work. And so I remember telling my brother, I'm like, oh my God, I think I found a way to tie in philosophy with my art. I'm like, I am so excited. And it just kind of it had its own life at that point. So what was your question? Sorry, am I answering it?
Well, yeah, I was asking just sort of when it started to become therapeutic for you.
Right. And I think that's the therapy part for me, being able to tie in these, like for me to be able to really share my learnings and kind of have a soundboard, like with people. And because like I get a lot of private messages from people who connect with my work, and it's because it's very emotional and very deep, and not a lot of people are comfortable sharing those sentiments publicly. And when I get that, it's such a beautiful gift, because the hope was always that I would start the journey with, unpacking my feelings, but then it would become a conduit for other people to, kind of insert their stories in it. And that's, I think, the therapy part for me. That's the biggest thing. Yeah. Like, I guess the greatest gift.
Yeah. I mean, it's remarkable that you've been able to find what it seems very obvious this is what you were meant to be doing. And
thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's by the work for sure, but just by the things, the way that you talk about it. I know that people rarely find, I think, their purpose. And I think a lot of the times that's because they don't seek it. They don't know to seek it, but then finding it. So I think that's really unique, and you're able to use yours to connect and help other people. When did was that always something that, that idea, was that inside of you, or did it not come out really until you became an artist?
So I was always, the altruistic side of things I was always interested in that. Okay. I've donated, I've worked with charities before. Even before I started painting, I volunteered with a charity for about 8 months. I pretty much worked there full time with no pay. And it's for me to be able to give back to the community and to the world through art was a dream. Like when I started painting, I told the charity when I left that I will help you with my art. And I did. I went back and donated works, and I painted. And so for me, that's always been a huge part of my work, that it was never just going to be about me. Like, and I talked about it today, like hubris. I'm very, very conscious of that, because it's a very slippery slope to go down, from pride to arrogance. It's a very blurred, very blurred line.
Instagram post. I mean, because you also write very, very well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Someday I'll write a book. I mean, that's definitely on the list.
For sure. I gotta think it has to be.
Thank you. Yeah. And so like, for me, like altruism is really a way of keeping my ego in check. And I don't believe in, and this is going to come off very, with the environment in the world right now, true altruism doesn't exist. It just doesn't. True selflessness doesn't exist. And that's okay, because we all want to feel good about ourselves. And if feeling good about yourselves is through altruism, what better way?
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's the path I wanted to always choose. My mom's very charitable. So for me, like that was kind of came through naturally. My grandpa was a freedom fighter. So we're all like, our family has always been pretty altruistic growing up. And for me to be able to kind of create works. As I do move forward though, things are shifting because I'm a very data driven person. And for me to be able to create projects that have indisputable numbers, I'm fascinated by that. And I don't see a lot of art projects created in the world where they're actually capturing this like data through art. And so that's my goal moving forward, that I want to create a project to show, kind of grasp the pulse of the good and evil in the world and shift that pendulum somehow in the positive way, in the positive light.
That's also a fascinating direction. How do you, what's your process like? Do you have an idea like that, and then for the next 3 months you're working on that, or is it daily? I
mean, this is a 5-year minimum commitment. Okay. Emotionally, I'm thinking about it because there's I want to work with, hopefully with a university of students or like Microsoft or one of those companies to kind of collect the data, analyze it, make it publicly available so that people can actually run, numbers through it, create projects around it, create algorithms around it. And being an e-commerce junkie, like this just comes naturally to me to think from that standpoint. Have you read Factfulness?
Yes, I have.
Right. And and that book, I think, is what propelled me into this direction, because I'd been thinking about it. But then when I read all those numbers, and people still dispute them, right? Like people still don't believe numbers. And for me, I just want this data that I can look at it and say, hey, look, in the South Side versus the North Side versus the East Side of Chicago, here are the issues that we're learning from this project. And I can go to charities or companies or whatever and say, here are the numbers and here's how we can create programs around these numbers and to improve this data. And so I don't know the creative side of things yet, which is so interesting because I usually work more from the creative side. But I have no idea how the art side of that is going to work. But I do know the end result, like what I want to capture. So I think so far I'm there as far as like the analytical side, but we'll see how I start the other way. Yeah. Because when I first started, I've been having conversations with people. And when I first started thinking about this, I'm thinking like, oh, the world, I want to prove that the world is a better place than we think it is. And I talked to a lawyer and he's like, well, you can't really do that because as a prosecutor, I can't walk in with any kind of assessment that the person is guilty or not, because I can't be fair otherwise. So he's like, you have to walk into this project thinking that it could be that the world is not a good place.
Interesting.
And I'm like, oh my God, that's just gonna like kill the love for the project. But then I'm thinking, and I'm not kidding, like for a week I was depressed. But then I kind of woke up one day and I was like, you know what, actually, if the pendulum is on the negative side, I have numbers to show that here are the negatives and here are the areas of improvement. Let's create projects to actually move it to the other. How can we move the needle? And so I think either way, I'm going to end up on the, in a great place. If it's if I can come back and say, hey, the world is better than, you think we are, which Factfulness already proves. Right. But like this is more of an emotional project because I kind of want to create this like emotional change in people, because I feel like the unrest right now, as much as it's necessary, I think it's just created a lot of pain and anger and hate. And I think like as an empath, I feel that collectively, and I feel the need, a calling to kind of shift that needle a little bit.
One of the things that occurred to me when I was preparing for this chat was that one could tell a story that your journey starting 5 years ago was so that you could help in this time where so many people are having such anxiety and depression and difficulty, and through your art and your experience, you're literally there to help people go through that process, that come out of that stronger. And we're going to have to, right? But it occurred to me that it was really interesting, and I saw some of the artwork you did, and I know Black Lives Matter is important to you and so forth. And so I think that's really important. And I think that people probably are. That's probably why you are getting DMs and stuff from people, because everybody's dealing with this.
Thank you. And Black Lives Matter, I should say it was a hard decision for me to make because I don't want to just paint for a singular cause. Because like, what if something happens with an Indian person tomorrow? I'm not going to go and paint Indian Lives Matter, right? Like for me, but the reason I chose to paint it is because from a systemic standpoint, we are in an era where things need to shift, right? Like I've studied enough about it. I am so like, I like numbers. Like I say, I have been deep diving for the last 2 years into the whole Black Lives Matter movement. And when I got called to do the piece, I was referred by someone to the church. And when I got called to do that, I actually told them that I'm not sure if I'm going to put Black Lives Matter on it because I am about community and, movement and unity. And they were gracious enough to let me, like, they said, okay, if you don't feel strongly about it, that's fine by us. The process is about Be the Bridge, the book. Yeah. And it took me, I'd say less than an hour to come back and say, let's put the hashtag on because I do support the movement, and so why not? I am here and I'm witnessing something pretty dramatic happening in our, and things need to change. And in some areas, things do need to change. And so I think supporting it it makes sense at this point. But I don't know if I'm going to paint for every cause out there. I just don't want to be that, right? Yeah.
I do want to ask, and we can skip it if it's uncomfortable. But
nothing's ever uncomfortable, man.
Okay,
it should not be.
Good. I figured. So, have you felt that there has been any difficulty or any scenarios that you've run into being a person of color in the art world? Is that a thing in the art world? Am I naive to even ask that question? I mean, like,
no, I don't think I have run into anything as far as colorism goes in the art world, but definitely as a woman, that's different. I mean, there's a very small percentage of women represented in museums and galleries. Women artists, for some reason, have diminished over time, which is so bizarre because a lot of these artists their main students were all women historically. So it's just unfortunate. And so, from that standpoint, 100%, like how we get treated as women versus men. There aren't that many women muralists. That was another reason I started. I'm an accidental muralist is what I call myself. Like, it's not something that I chose, like woke up and said, oh, let me paint murals. It's just when I got asked to do one, the first one, which was at Violet Hour, I turned it down. I was like, oh my God, I'm not a muralist. But the person who referred me to them kept saying, just do it. Like, just do one. It's a temporary mural. And it was so incredibly beautiful because I'm standing there next day and they don't know I painted it. And to me, it was the most incredible thing because it wasn't about me and it took me out of the equation. So I think murals for me, that is the point of attraction, that once I paint them, I walk away and it's never about me because I've been near my murals and people have no idea that I painted it. And I hate it when my friends are there and they're like, she painted it. I'm like, shut up. Like, I don't want them to know. It's like a moment of joy for me that I'm not part of the equation. I've diminished.
Yeah. So since all questions are open, I have one more that I want to ask. Do you think I know you're better at your relationship with your father now, but are you better at relationships over the last 5 years going through this and processing and
relationships as far as romantic?
Yeah, because you talked about the breakup and how you reflected.
Yes and no. That's an interesting question because
still work to be done.
I don't know. I haven't fallen in love yet.
Okay.
Since then, so I don't know what that's going to be like. I think I got close to someone 3 years ago, and it was definitely scary because getting your heart broken on the level that mine did. Which I'm very grateful for because, broken hearts are much more beautiful. But I think the fear is there of how I will respond to a broken heart again. So again, I have no idea. I can't tell you that I've learned enough. I've definitely gotten better, I'd say, in assessing if the person's right for me and I'm right for them. And I think I am kinder. I think that's the greatest learning. I am a much better friend now than I've ever been in life. I'm not judgmental like I was back in the day, mainly because I didn't know myself as well. And I think until you do that, I don't think you can give true non-judgmental relationships to people. So yeah, from that standpoint, I'd say I'm a better partner for sure. We'll find out when I fall in love, man, how that's going to be.
Well, hopefully that
I'm
one
not
works
dating
out.
I don't go on as many dates as I should. I really should. I'm like, I don't know. I'm so focused on building a brand right now that it's really hard for me to be emotionally available in any other space, because this takes my everything right now emotionally.
I get that.
And I'm incredibly happy. So I feel like, I don't know if I have any more, happiness to share right now. It sounds very selfish, but that's where I'm at right now.
Fair enough. Okay, final question for you, and I
Okay.
guess this will probably be like if you ask me which of my kids is my favorite. But is there a piece that is your favorite, or does it fluctuate and you really fall in love with one or another? Or is it the one you're working on?
It fluctuates over time, I'd say. But Horizon is probably my favorite piece I've ever painted. And I want to paint it as a mural. And so far, no one's asked me to do it, which I'm like, somebody asked me to paint it as a mural. I've had interest in people asking me to do it, but the piece sold last year. But that's my favorite painting I've ever done. That's part of my 100-day project.
Oh, really? From 15?
From 2015, yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
All right, very cool.
I'm actually getting it tattooed.
Oh, okay. Where?
Yeah, it was my tattoo artist idea.
Okay.
I'm like, oh my God, I actually like it. It's going to be on my shoulder because it's the girl with the birds coming out.
Oh, yeah.
She's like, we can have the birds coming out on your shoulder. So
Nice.
very cool idea. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll put all these up, but I have seen that one. That one's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's my favorite piece. Yeah, it was very cathartic. It was like towards the end of that project when I had like really, really like found myself. I should say.
Okay, that was the one. I lied. I have one bonus question, and there's
Sure.
only one. There's only one right answer to this. What's your favorite deep dish pizza?
I don't like deep dish.
What? That's definitely not the right answer for that question.
But honestly, if I was to have it, it would probably be Giordano's.
Okay. All right. Well, that's all right.
Or honestly, Illuminati's too.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm not the right person. I'm not.
Okay. But you did say Lou Malnati's, and we're gonna stick with that.
So I should say Lou Malnati's actually, because the crust is much better. How about that?
Yeah.
It's crispier. Yes. But
yeah,
I like New York pizza, man. I should have been salsa.
Oh no, you should have stopped while you were ahead.
I like thin crust. I like the little slices. Yeah. I know it sounds horrible, but yeah.
Well, Aurelio's. Have you had Aurelio's in Chicago?
I haven't.
Okay, it's got a really good thin crust. That's my wife's favorite.
Perfect.
I'm from Chicago originally. We moved when I was 5, but we've been up there a bunch. But Aurelio's, try it out.
Okay, I will.
Jenny, I can't thank you enough for doing this, but for what you give back to the world. I'm so thrilled that you said yes to have this chat with me.
Thank you for having me.
If there's anything I can ever do to help you, let me know. Come to Atlanta. Atlanta, we talk about the Phoenix all the time because their city was burned down, and so we rose from the ashes. So, we'll embrace you. Come on down when you can travel.
Thank you. Yeah, I haven't been to Atlanta. It's on my list, so definitely, especially with Lisa. Maybe one day we'll plan a trip.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Well, thanks again, and keep it up. We love what you're doing.
Thank you. This was wonderful. Thank you for asking such beautiful questions. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thanks.
Bye.